you're going to see that pop up. I would love to get to know just a little bit about who's in the room. So in the chat, if you would just put like ninth grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade as we are going, that'll just kind of help me tailor as I talk about the different types of essays. So feel free, just throw your grade level in there just so I can get to see. Okay, whole lot of juniors. That's amazing. That is exactly the people that should be hearing this information. 10th graders and ninth graders, this is going to be really great information for you. But we're really targeting our juniors here as we start the process of jumping into thinking about college admissions, as well as writing the different essays. So we've done a couple other sessions virtually. So this is the third one. I really just wanted to chat about just the components really quick of a college application, especially for my juniors. If you are friends with a senior right now, they are currently making their decisions on where they're going to go to school. Maybe they are attending open houses, comparing financial aid things, and that will be you next year. But there's really four big components that goes into the college application. Of course, it's yes, your application. Colleges need to know your name, your email, what you want to study, things like that. Your transcript is probably really, I don't want to say the biggest, but probably the biggest piece. So as juniors, we just started fourth quarter. I always tell students, the grades that you finish junior year with are definitely the grades that you're going to be applying to college with. So this is why we want to make sure we lock in for fourth quarter and we try to get our grades as high as possible. I will say, you do, when you are applying to college, we do get to see your classes that are in progress for senior year, but we only see your final grades at the end of junior year. So that's why it's really important. The next piece is test scores. So if you decide to take the SAT or the ACT, I always recommend everybody takes it at least once. Get a score under your belt because you never know if a college will require it or a scholarship will require it. Most places, we're still hanging out test optional, but there are some schools that do require test scores. So take it once, if not twice. I know there's one coming up May 2nd, so you got some time. Another piece is letters of recommendation. So that is where hopefully somebody can speak positively about you as a person and as a student. So some colleges want to see one counselor, one teacher. Some don't want any letters of recommendation. And the last piece is really your essay. And that's what we're really going to focus on for our session today. This is my favorite part about the college application process because this is where I get to learn more about a student. And it's where I get a deeper dive into who they are as a person, some of their hobbies and interests, things like that. I tell students, your GPA is a magic number. Your test scores is a number, but your essay writing is really where you can showcase who you are as a person. So some of the different essays you might see along the way. I put the Common App in here because everybody, when we apply to college, we want to do the Common App. That is a way you can apply to up to 20 schools all at once. You will hear about it a ton, I'm sure, during your senior year. But there's different types of essays that you can see in things. The first one's going to be your main essay. That's the one we're going to talk about today. That is 650 words, and there's 7 prompts to choose from, and I'll show you the prompts. You can take a picture of it. The prompts really don't change. I have been in higher ed for quite some time, and I don't think I've seen them change too often. So your main essay. The next is going to be supplemental essays, and then as well as scholarship essays. So as a student, you would just want to kind of be prepared to see some of those while you are doing the application process, as well as applying for different scholarships. So what do colleges actually use your personal statement for? Like I mentioned, it is showing the colleges, A, something new about you, but then also B, that you can write at a college level. They're looking to see, are we making grammar mistakes? Are we spelling things incorrectly? Do we know how to format a paragraph? And do we know how to tell a good story? So that's really kind of why we're here. In addition to those things, I will tell students, when you're writing your essay or when you're doing the Common App, you get to put a lot of information in your Common App. You get to list up to 10 different activities that you do. So that could be sports or clubs or volunteer work, things like that. But you also get to list any honors that you've done. You can list all of the classes that you're taking. So I tell students when we are working on the personal statement, you want to make sure that the reader is going to learn something new about you or something more in depth about an activity. You don't want to just restate everything else that you're already going to see somewhere else in your application in the first place. So this is one to take a picture of. So these are the 7 different prompts that as a high school senior, you would be submitting. I tell students starting a rough draft in the spring or summer of your junior year is a really great idea just to start kind of compiling all your thoughts. So I'm going to go through all 7 of these, and I'm going to tell you at least one kind of tip or trick for any of them. The first one talks about your background, identity, interest, or a talent that is so meaningful that maybe there was no other place on your application to put it. And so a lot of times students here talk about their families, whether it is their culture, their upbringing, their nationality. This is a really great place to tell that story. A lot of times, the best ones that come out of the first prompt tend to be ones that are about their family and what they've learned. I tell students a lot of times we think about, especially in prompt 1, we think about the background and we do a really deep dive on mom or grandparents or aunts and uncles, but the student doesn't highlight themselves enough in the first prompt. So I always tell students if you're going to pick the first one, make sure you're taking what your family or your background, your identity, what it means to you, and then how have you propelled
Little
yourself
Salam, are you in the
forward
room? What about?
because of that identity. The second one is the lessons from obstacles. So if you've overcome an obstacle, you've had something really impactful happen in your life. This one is a place for you to write about how did it affect you and what did you gain from that experience. So this is kind of the same thing I see a lot of students do where they talk really heavy about the obstacle and they don't really focus on what they've learned or how they're moving forward from that obstacle. They focus a lot of those 650 words on the obstacle itself. And while the reader, we want to know the heaviness of the obstacle, I want to learn more about what you learned, gained, and have grown forward because of that. So that's the second one. Those 2 are definitely the most common that I read. As I work through the rest of them, feel free, like you do not have to pick 1 or 2, but those are definitely the 2 most common ones that we read. My personal favorite is all the way is number 7. 6 and 7 are my favorites. But number 3 is reflect on a time when you've challenged or questioned belief, and that's the same thing. Don't focus on how you challenge, focus on the outcome. So you always want to be the victor or the hero in your story when you're writing these different essays. Same thing for number 4. Reflect on something that somebody has done from you. So, and I have a slide later that says we really want to see how you have grown as a person and how these different life experiences have shaped you as a person. And then when we get down to the bottom 2, describing a topic, idea, or concept that you find so engaging that you lose track of time. I tell students, I've been reading essays for quite some time, and my favorite one I've ever read was about a student. He was going into engineering, and he picked the 6th prompt, and he painted me this beautiful picture of what it was like to go to the movies as a family every time a Marvel movie came out. He was not studying film. He had nothing, it was nothing to do with film in his major or any of his activities even, but he painted such a beautiful picture of going into a theater and smelling the popcorn, and I felt like I was in that AMC theater with him. So that's what we want to see from these different essays. And then number 7 is just any topic of your choice. You can submit something that you've already written. I tell students, if you read Beowulf or Moby Dick or something in school, please don't submit the paper that you wrote for that class. Submit something else that maybe you just are passionate about that doesn't actually fit into any of these prompts. But that's why I love the Common App essay, is because you really can write about anything you want. So I tell students, and I think it's on my next slide. two slides later. Some of the different supplemental essays you can see. Now, the big Common App essay you're going to submit for most schools in Virginia are going to use that essay in determining your college admissions. There are a couple that will not read the big essay. They might have their own supplemental essays, or in addition to that first essay, they have some more supplemental essays. So these are kind of the four most common ones you're going to see across the board. The first one is why George Mason? Why insert college here? This is where you can actually show a college or a university that you have done the research on their school. If somebody says, if I'm reading a why George Mason essay and they're like, I love the coast of California, clearly you copied and pasted this from a different essay. So this is a place to showcase that you have done research on that college and that it is actually something that you are really interested in. Same thing for why insert major here. So why computer science? Why nursing? Why cybersecurity? That is where you can actually talk about, especially if you know something that's really unique at that college. So why computer game design? Oh, or why George Mason? Oh, computer game design. This is where you can kind of tie the university together with the things that they have to offer if you've done that research. But this is where colleges are kind of looking to see, have you done your due diligence of digging on not only us as a college or university, but have you done your due diligence of digging even deeper to learn about what our major looks like, not only in general, but then also the opportunities that we could present depending on the college. You might see some that says, explain in more detail, and then something else. So they could be explain in more detail how you could contribute to the diversity of our campus. Explain in more detail how you could take an extracurricular you did in high school and apply it at our university. So this is where you can really talk a lot about yourself and your involvement that you have at your prospective high schools or in your communities or churches or wherever you do or spend your time outside of the classroom. That's where you can do a deep dive, even if you haven't done it anywhere else. And the last supplemental you'll see is future goals. This is one I tell students to just have written out because when I get to the scholarship essay slide, it's right there too. People want to know, what do you want to do kind of with your degree and with scholarship money? So anytime that you can write about your future goals and the impact that you hope to make, that's what a lot of not only colleges, but then scholarship committee people want to see. Especially if you can tie it to not only, globally or nationally, but if you can especially talk about the local impact that you're hoping to make in that community around you, that can speak volumes to those different scholarship and colleges. So speaking about scholarship essays, the big things, like I mentioned, are going to talk about your academic and career goals. They want to know
a couple things left.
if they're going to be giving you money, how do you plan to further not only yourself, but your local, national, and global communities. The next one that you will see a lot for scholarships is going to be leadership. And I tell students, when we think about the word leadership, we think about, the president of the student body or the president of this club. Leadership comes in a lot of shapes and sizes for students. You don't always have to be the captain of the football team or the president of a club. Leadership can come in to, I have to pick up my siblings. Parents have to work. I have to pick up my siblings after school. I make sure they come home, they do their homework, right? There's leadership that comes in all shapes and sizes for students. And so this is one where you can reflect on your personal leadership skills, whether that's in the classroom, in a club, on a team, or at home. And then the last thing is, how would the money impact you? And that's the one that I see a lot of students, hiccup the most on, because every kid wants money. So when you are writing a scholarship essay to potentially ask somebody to give you, $1,000, $2,000, whatever it is, simply just saying the money would be great, it would help me pay my tuition. Yes, no brainer. In reality, tie that dollar amount to something equivalent in college. So for example, if it's $1,000 scholarship, hey, if I were to get this $1,000 scholarship, that would directly help me pay for my textbooks for my anatomy class, my engineering class. Being able to tie specific dollar amounts to something tangible at the college level will help your essay not only stand out to the different readers on the scholarship committee, but it will also make the reader kind of understand that you've done the research on what you could that you've done the research on what you could potentially be spending money on in college. But then it also tells them that you're really serious about applying for these scholarships. So I tell students when we think about essays in high school, we write, tons and tons throughout your time. We're told do not use the same essay. We're told you can only write it once. Do not submit something that you've already submitted for another piece of work. When it comes to these essays for scholarships and for the supplemental things, this is where you can rinse and repeat. No two scholarship committees are probably ever going to be the same. So I tell students, when I was in college, I wrote one scholarship essay and I just tweaked it every year. I tweaked my GPA, I tweaked my involvement that I talked about on campus, and I used it over and over again. And that is something that you can do. So I tell students, not on your APS email because that will disappear. But if you have a personal Gmail account, start a Google Doc and just start listing all the activities that you're involved in and if you have any leadership roles. But start just brain dumping all of the different essays that you could kind of see. That way, if a scholarship is asking for something that kind of maybe ties two of them together or asks something different, you can kind of piecemeal them together to get one good essay. So that's why I tell students, especially at the end of your junior year, you've done a lot of the hard work when it comes to joining clubs and things like that. Of course, you can still get involved senior year, but this is when you can just start listing everything down and kind of preparing all this together. So the tips and tricks that I have for all of the essays combined is to be yourself, number one. This is really, really reflecting on your personal statement, especially as a reader who reads applications. We read, we had 22,000 applications this year. We've read a lot of essays. So anytime that it's actually in your voice, it's going to stand out. I tell students, you do not have to climb Mount Everest. I'm not saying you have to have overcome the most, crazy obstacle that you could think of in the world. Everybody has overcome something. So if that's something that you choose, do not feel like your struggle is not big enough to write about. I kind of already mentioned this. Don't restate things that are in your application. Like I said, I'm going to see your activities. I'm going to see your involvement. I'm going to see all the classes that you're taking, especially in your transcript. So you want to make sure that I'm going to learn something new. And then, of course, proofread. I tell students, proofread, but don't lose your voice. In terms of, you're going to write this, and then you're going to give it to your friends to look at. Then you're going to give it to maybe your parents to look at. Then your English teacher might look at it. And then you might give it back to your parents. And then you might take a look at it again. And then you're going to give it to your neighbor's parents. And then so many people are going to have read this essay and tweaked it for you and reworked some of the language. But make sure before you press submit to a college or university that it's still in your voice and that it doesn't sound like, no offense to my parents, that it doesn't sound like, your mom or dad wrote it. You want to make sure that it sounds like you as being a 17 or 18-year-old applying to a college and how you would actually think and write. So when it comes to kind of knowing where to start, we're really going to focus on doing a deep dive on the actual personal statement because that is what a lot of colleges are looking at. I tell students, take as much time on those supplemental essays as you do on your big essay. Like I said, all of those edits that are going to go into place for your big essay, don't be a different student in the supplementals. There are so many kids that I've read a beautifully polished personal statement, and then I will go read their YGMU supplemental essay, and it's like a brain dump. And there's no punctuation, there's no capital letters, there's no commas, no periods. Like it's just one big run-on sentence. So you want to make sure, especially for those schools that don't use the big essay, that you actually take the time to write those supplemental essays. Okay, so knowing where to begin and knowing where to start can seem really daunting, especially when I put 7 prompts in front of you and I tell you to pick one. I tell students all the time, your first thing is to identify what's important to you. And we're going to do a little exercise. I'm going to drop it in the chat after this, so we can start identifying the values, but then also like what story do you want to tell? So when we think back to those 7 prompts, do you want to focus on an obstacle? Do you want to focus on your culture or identity? What do you want to focus on? I had a girl up at or over at Falls Church this year. I was helping her with her essay, and she wrote 2 just brain dumps, and one was about her family and her culture and her heritage, and the other one was about being a cheerleader. And the story that she was telling about being a cheerleader was being the prompt and the on time and having a routine and being um, trying to always be perfect. And I looked at both stories and I said, the cheerleading one was a better story to tell. And so I tell students your first draft, you're going to write multiple drafts of this, just like you do any research paper. Your first draft is just brain dump any and all of the details. Anytime that you are thinking about the big story that you want to tell, you're going to cut it down to 650 words. But I also tell students, if you can tell the full story without using all 650 words, don't feel like you need to add just random details to get it to 650. If your story is complete, don't feel the need to fill it. But then also, you have 650 words. Don't give me a paragraph. So you want to make sure that you are telling a full story. So first draft, brain dump all the details, just write down who, what, where, when, why, how, and then we can filter it from there. Your second draft is where I tell students, after you've brain dumped, go in with your highlighter, whether you have it, handwritten or it's on your Google Doc. That is where I want you to go in and highlight, the important pieces of the story. And that's where we get down to the third bullet of the apply the so what method. When students are writing their essays, I always tell them, after you read a paragraph, I want you to say to yourself, so what? What did I want the reader to learn in this? And did that convey? And then what importance does this have to the story? If it is a detail that is not going to tie in later on, or it doesn't have a really, really, really big weight to the story, maybe it's not something that we need to take that space to do. So apply the so what test and just make sure that everything that you're writing is an intentional and it has a piece to the big story. And then when you're going through that, your third draft, you are going to revise, revise, revise. You're going to add, you're going to remove, you're going to talk to people, you're going to add things, spell check, all of that fun stuff. And then at the end, you always want to close it with either a callback to how it started, or B, you want to just talk about the growth that you've had throughout, or what you've learned from it, or kind of a reflection that you've had over time. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, or actually I'm going to go back to this screen to just keep it up for you guys. And I'm going to drop into the chat our first activity for tonight. So our first activity is going to be really great for the students. This is what we call the roles and identities worksheet. And I do this with every student that I do an essay workshop with. I'm just scrolling back. You guys are all juniors. Awesome. So in this, you guys should be able to click it and open it. I'll give you guys a few minutes to be able to log in. In this, whoop, everything's popping up. You are actually going to see the different roles and identities that we could potentially write about, okay? I tell students this is a great thing to do to either learn what story you might want to tell or to learn what voice to tell your story in. And I say that to say, if you are a naturally funny person, maybe you want to add some tidbits of humor into your story. If you are not a funny person, don't try to add the humor in because it's not going to land. So when we go through this, hopefully everybody's got it up. It should open up as a Word doc for everybody. Feel free to enable the editing and we're going to go through. So the instructions are kind of at the top to where you are going to underline or highlight at this point if you were working on a Word doc. I want you to just highlight the top 10 roles as you read through this. So I like to say, a lot of times students are highlighting the decision maker one, right? So if you are the person who in the friend group, you're the one that's like, let's go do this. If you think you are the ones who are connecting all of your friends together, or cheerleader does not necessarily mean that you are the cheerleader, but maybe you are the person who is always encouraging others. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes. I want my students to go through and highlight your top 10 um, identities or roles that you kind of hold, whether it's at home or in your friend group. And I'm going to mute myself, give you guys 3 to 5 minutes to do that. Okay, once you have 10, if you're reading ahead on the sheet, I want you to take that 10 and we are going to go down to 5. So you can either highlight in a different color or unhighlight if you'd like. Get down to 5. And then after we're down to 5, we're going to go down to 3. And then once you're down to 3, I would love for you to put 1, 2, or 3 of them in the chat, just so we can kind of see kind of the role and identity that you hold, whether that's, like I said, in your family or friend group. So feel free, drop 1, 2, or 3 of them in the chat. That tells me you're done. Awesome, Carmen. Thank you. Couple artists out here. Okay. Awesome. So as you work through these, the next piece of it is to potentially write 2 to 3 sentences. I'm not going to make you guys do that because you are out of school. But in reality, this is where I tell students this is a really great starting point as we think about the essays that we might want to write. A couple of you had, I saw leader in there a couple times, critical thinker, fighter. These are all things that are traits that I want you to try to convey in your essays. When you think about all of the activity lists that you're going to have with all of the different things that you guys do, like in your communities. These are personality traits that I'm not going to just see unless it's coming either out of your letters of recommendation or in your essay. So, um, whenever you are have your free period at school or anything, this is supposed to have you guys think about how you hold these identities. So, for example, if you are the leader, it actually has you talk about at how are you a leader? How are you going to be, the bookworm, or how are you going to be the problem solver? And so that can lead you to a couple different stories to tell. So now that you know maybe the voice that you want to have or what you want the reader to learn about you, this is the next piece. And this one does have a little bit of writing. But this is where we start thinking about our interests and passion. So I just dropped another one in here. The interest and passion worksheet is what I'm going to leave you guys with to take work on as a family. But this is where you actually can start thinking about the different stories that you want to tell. So this worksheet does a deep dive through just different topics you can talk about if you don't really know what you want to talk about. So if you know that you want to talk about, culture identity, then great, you can run with that. If you know you want to talk about an obstacle that you've overcome and one immediately jumps to your mind, go ahead and write about that. But this is where it really allows students to think about what are they spending their time and their money? What do they truly care about? What are their strengths? Kind of throughout their time in high school. So, especially on page 1, it kind of lets you jot some things down. So when I work with students, in the in-person setting, I have them sit down and reflect. A lot of times they're opening up their bank accounts for number 2 when they're thinking about what they are spending their time and money on. But that can talk about, your hobbies. When we think about the activities that we're writing about or the activities that we're listing in person or in your application, we don't always necessarily think about the hobbies that we have. We think about people that I interact with and that I see and that I do in school, but playing video games and live streaming on Twitch, right? That's an activity. People I've read are, they have their own little like baking business as high school students. Some people love to craft, and that's not necessarily, a school sanctioned event, but it's something that's taking up their time and their money and their interest and that's what they're really excited about. So I wanted to, and I'm going to reshare my screen when I get this PowerPoint back up so you guys can actually see one more time those different essay prompts. And hopefully that can help frame this activity as we go through. And then I'm going to open the floor for questions. We have about 25 minutes left, but I really wanted the students to be able to work on that worksheet to really help them with that Common App essay. But I wanted to open it up. You guys can unmute if you have questions, whether it's about, scholarship essays, supplementals, or the main essay. I also am on the scholarship committee for George Mason, so I get to read all of those essays as well. And prior to coming to Mason, I worked in Fairfax County doing what Mr. Duraco does. So I have helped students kind of formulate all types of different essays. So here to help answer any questions you guys may have, but then also giving students a time to work on that worksheet. And then if you want, you can throw them in the chat as well.